Belisarius Prime and the other commander, Elanor of Aquatine, probably butchered that, have had a little bit of time to settle into the open field meta of Rise of Kingdoms, and they've seen some changes that have come to the meta between a lot of the other commanders. And on top of this, just over time, we've seen some of the older commanders begin to fall off. So in today's video, I'll be updating my open field tier list, which commanders are currently the best on the open field, and which commanders are performing really well right now. So if you're interested in the best open field commanders as of May 2024 with the release of Belisarius Prime, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off by talking about what is open field performance in my opinion when I rank it, and I always do this with any of my tier lists, and really simply the criteria I'll be following today have like 3 or 4 main things. First, are they performing well right now? That's probably the biggest. This is the open field tier list. This is the tier list all about who's doing best in the field right now. If you were to do a right now investment, who would you pick up? And who's just going to trade the best? The second is what support do they bring immutable? Maybe they've got really good debuffs. Maybe they are really strong in some regards, but maybe not too strong in others. Stuff like that will also be considered, and they will also consider the best pairings for that commander. They're very fixed on one pairing. Do they have a lot of pairings, or are they just a fairly average commander in that regard? Because that definitely affects open field performance, because sometimes a commander that someone may be best with is better with some other commander, which can affect their really effectiveness. And the final thing I will take into consideration is just the age of the commander, because this is somewhat of an investment tier list, but somewhat not. So it's kind of like an in-between. It's got some now and some later stuff, but really that is all with the ranking criteria, and with that out of the way, let's get into the tier list. Now here is the open field tier list, and I mean, if you wanted to know what any of these tiers mean, I think they're fairly self-explanatory. The best of the best are the meta commanders. The good commanders are really solid right now. Usually they're the best secondary to a meta commander, or they're just a really good second march for a certain troop type. Average, they've got a lot of use cases. They can be fairly strong, but they're not really game breaking. They're not a must invest. Most people don't really run them unless you've got a more unique mutable. Bad, I mean, they're just okay. You can barely get by with them, but I wouldn't recommend them. And trash, just don't go anywhere near any of these commanders. The first commander up on today's list, we got Chandragupta, and I'm going to put him into the bad tier. I think with new calves now, especially a very debuff-heavy cavalry commander like Belisarius, when we look at someone like Chandragupta, they're just not as meta as they used to be, and bad tier is really where they belong now. They're not in the average anymore, they're not in the trash, they're just sitting at around bad. And unless they get a relic, that's probably not going to change. Nevsky, straight in the meta, he's still the best cav commander currently as a primary at least, and there really isn't any competition, so I think he's worthy of the meta, but if we don't see a new good cavalry commander, at least within the next year or so, he will be going down multiple tiers, because yes, he's still very good right now, but he's not as strong as some of the meta infantry and archer marchers. Alexander the Great goes into the good tier because he is doing very good at the moment. Alexander has been trading really well with Liuchur, and he's just being a very powerful infantry commander, especially with his newly upgraded relics. So you cannot go wrong with an Alexander the Great right now, on the open field at the very least. As an investment, he's a bit questionable, I will put that out there, just because he's a Season 2 commander. He's very old, and we have new infantry around the corner. But as of open field performance right now, he is a good commander. Suleiman and Lubu, I'll just chuck them both into trash. CJ, he's doing pretty average. He's not meta breaking. He's still sitting around the same strength he's really sat at for quite a while. He's got some uses for bigger infantry murdables. He can trade fairly average against some weaker marchers who are lower on HP, but he's just not an overpowered commander by any means, and I don't think he ever will be, or really has ever been that overpowered. Same thing with Caesar. When Caesar got his relic, he might have been, at least when he first got it, in the good tier, but right now I think he's an average commander. He's got some unique pairings with Hao Bing and also Zhang Yu, just because they have very fast rage cycles, and he can work okay as a placeholder commander, similar to Mehmed, but he's nowhere near as game-breaking as some of the commanders in the higher tiers. Boudica Prime, she's going to go into good, probably a bit lower on the tier. She's pretty good. I mean, she trades well, she's got a really nice debuff, and she can still perform pretty alright on the open field. And Belisarius Prime, he kind of counters Boudica with some of his unique things, but he's not really that game breaking, so I think that Boudica is still going to stick around the good tier for quite a while. As for Cao Cao, I mean, he is probably just a trash commander. He's not a commander you really bring out nowadays. He's got an okay double relic, you can maybe get away with him, but I don't really see many use cases with Cao Cao. I really see him on the open field, besides if you're farm killing or chasing people around. So I think that trash is really the best place for him. I wouldn't put gold heads in him. I wouldn't get his relic over some of the better relics out there like Minamoto. It is just really a not very good investment and not a very strong commander. Gilgamesh, he's bad. He's okay for moving to 5 or 6 Archer Marches, but he's nowhere near one of your meta investments or even a top pick. Attila, and I'm just going to also grab Takeda. They're going to both go into the average tier. They've seen a bit of a comeback. Takeda used to be in the bad tier. Sometimes Attila was in the bad tier, really depending on the meta. But with their new relics, they've gotten a little bit more love. It's not a massive relic, not a massive change, of course, but they are in a pretty alright position and they're trading pretty okay. And as a rally, for a side note, he does do pretty good, which is always a semi-nice thing. Charlemagne, I mean, he's trash. What more do you have to say? Edward of Woodstock arguably could be in the bad tier, but I think nowadays he's going to go down to trash. New calves, he's getting really old, his relic does pretty much nothing, and you don't really run him unless you're doing like 7 Archer Marches. I pretty much put him down as like one of the last commanders you ever use, unless you're in like Season 2, so I would avoid Edward of Woodstock pretty much at all costs. Constantine for the open field, he's bad. He's got his uses in Garrison and Lost Canyon, but he's not really that overpowered in open field. Maybe in KVK 2, like Edward of Woodstock, but we're more looking at Season of Conquest here, so I'm not going to put him in the average tier, and he doesn't really have much open field usage, unless you're looking to tank 7 wounds, which I guess can work, but it's just a very poor strategy for you to run. Ramsey's also in the bad tier, once again similar to Gilgamesh. He's only an Archer commander I pick up when you're moving towards 5 or 6 Archer Marches. He's not one of your top priorities. Frederick, he's going to go in the bad tier as well. He's got some okay value in the fact that you can use him at 5-1-1-1, but other than that, you wouldn't really run him on the open field. But he is a really cheap possible substitute if you don't have a good Caesar or don't have a good Mehmed as like a really early Season 3 or Season of Conquest commander if you do double relic him. That's why he's not trash, but he isn't really a very good commander at all, and I wouldn't really recommend running him unless you absolutely had to. Zenobia for field, she's garbage. Honda's pretty average right now. He's probably around the same power as Caesar, a little bit better if anything, but he's not game breaking. He's just one of those leadership secondary commanders who works with pretty much anybody, which is always a nice thing. It definitely helps him on the open field. You can use him in city popping, you can use him in swarming, you can use him in just normal open field fights. He's got his uses, but he's just not meta. Bertrand, I mean, he's pretty bad right now, I want to say. He's not average, really. I think he's just below that tier nowadays. New calves kind of pushed him down a little bit. He's always not been the best on the open field. I rarely see him run, and you might only get him with like 4 or 5 cav marches, so he's not your number 1 pick. Guan's going to go top of average nowadays. He's got good trades, he's got good debuffs. It's just he's very squishy, and if you at least end up in the wrong position with him, you're going to get a really bad trade. So I'll keep that in mind with Guan. If he was a bit tankier or had some more march speed, he'd be in the good tier. But nowadays, he's not your top pick. He's only there for around a 2nd infantry march. And even then, he's the weaker of the 4 infantry commanders that I would say are really in the meta nowadays. Scipio, I mean, he's still meta. He's really good on the open field. He's got an AoE. He's still pretty good with Guan for what that's worth. And if we see a new infantry pairing that goes well with him, we could see him stay in this tier. But I want to say that over the coming months, once we see new infantry, he will probably drop down to the good tier. Harold, I think Harold's doing pretty average. For city popping, he's alright right now. He's just not absolutely meta. And I want to say Martel is probably, I'm going to go in between. I want to say he's in the bad tier just because he isn't the most meta nowadays. He isn't as strong as he used to be. And his relic, it was supposed to be getting a triple relic. To my knowledge, it hasn't come out yet. So he isn't really the most amazing commander. He has some uses in a KVK1 Garrison situation and some, well, pretty good use actually in KVK2 and KVK1 on the open field. But once you hit Season 3 and Season of Conquest, he definitely starts to lose value, especially against some of the more overpowered archer commanders with extremely high skill damage that he can't really tank his way through. All 3 Gathering Commanders, I mean, they're just going to go in the trash tier. They're not open field for really anything. They're meta for what they do as in Gathering, but I just wouldn't run Ishida, Sundok, or Cleopatra as an open field commander. Khan, he's bad. If you're looking at 5-6 marches, you could pick him up for calves. He's okay in KVK2, but he's not your number 1 pick, and his relic is fairly average at the most. Hannibal Barker, he's garbage. Tarek's doing pretty average right now, similar to that of Guan. Not the most meta, pretty good for around 3 infantry marches, but he's not really your go-to, though he can work with commanders like Scipio in 2 marches if you don't have a Guan. He can work with Liu Chu even in 1 march. It's not overpowered, but it is an option. So he's got some use cases, but he's just not very meta. YSS, I mean, he's a garrison. El Cid, he is, I want to put him at like the top of the trash tier. He's kind of trash, barely on the bad tier maybe. I'll put him on the bad tier. I'll put him up with Frederick. He's okay on the open field, barely as an archer substitute, especially with Zhuge Liang if you first hit Season of Conquest, just because he's got march, but he's got defense, he's got the stuff that Zhulang really needs, so he's got that one-up over some of the commanders like Mehmed and Caesar when it comes to being a substitute for Zhuge Liang. So if you have a Zhuge and you don't have anyone else, you can just chuck an El Cid with him, which is a fairly solid option. That's why he's not in trash, but he's borderline in that tier. Gorgo is going to go into the, I want to go average. If Alexander the Great wasn't so strong and wasn't as dominant as he was right now, we could have seen a reversal with something like this. But really, Gorgo, since Alexander's kind of better than her in the open field because of his march speed and better debuffs, we see him as the better and more dominant pairing with Liu Chu, which means that Gorgo pretty much has no pairing. So that's definitely a big issue with her. And I've heard a lot of people say she lacks march speed, which is kind of true, but to be fair, she's faster than some of the archer marchers. Zhuge Liang, I mean, he's meta. 5 target AoE, 2000 damage, really high skill damage, pretty much a double active skill, fairly powerful expertise. He's got a lot going for him. Every single archer commander works well with him, and he's just one of the best archer commanders currently in the game. Saladin, very similar to Khan. You only get him if you're looking for like 5 or 6 cavalry marchers. And he is more of a KVK2 and really just KVK2 commander. If you do relic him, he can work in Season 3, but he isn't a go-to. Belisarius, a lot of people are going to hate on this, but I'm going to put him in the good tier. Everyone says he's only for swarming, but if you're running a lot of marches, Belisarius can be pretty good on the open field. If you're running up to 5 marches, just because you're going to get the instant all damage increase, and it's fairly solid. No, he's not meta. No, he's not the best commander in the game, but he's got use cases. He's around the same power as William, and William would end up in this tier, and will end up in this tier today. So Belisarius, he's good in that regard. He's still got the strength. He's got an instant debuff, very similar to that of like a Tamiris, but it's just better. So if you're hitting with 5 marches, you instantly get 12% more all damage on the opponent, which is like giving each march 12% more all damage. It's like 60% really. It's like a 60% all damage increase instantly. And the thing I really don't like about people when they talk about Belisarius, they underestimate the strength of that instant debuff in the fact that open field is fast paced, bang bang, run a race, smash them, and then the instant all damage debuff, it's pretty good. Is it meta? No. Would I run it if I don't have 5 marches? No. And it's a bit difficult to rank in that regard. But if you have 5 marches and you're looking for a fairly decent debuffing cavalry commander, and especially if you don't have William already, I think I'd rather Belisarius, because a lot of William stuff is either a percentage chance to occur, like his rage increase, or it's reliant on his active skill, whereas Belisarius, all he needs is to swarm the target, and you get that amazing debuff. So I think that he's worthy of the good tier. He's not average, definitely not bad, so good is where I personally believe he does belong. Jan Ziska, he's bad. I've seen him used on the open field. He can do okay, but he's not your go-to. Jadwiga, she's trash. She's not a very good commander on the field. Ethelfled, she's bad. She's got some use cases with someone such as a Trajan. She's got okay use cases. Maybe with some other marchers like a Martel in KVK1, or sometimes with a Scipio in Season of Conquest, but you rarely see an Ethelfled on the open field nowadays, just because she is definitely a debuff commander. All of her debuffs have pretty much been outclassed, and her damage is just downright rubbish. So Ethelfled's not an amazing commander nowadays. Most people do not run her, and I think that's totally fair. She's got nothing besides pretty good debuffs and an okay damage at the very maximum. YSG, he's average. He's about like a weaker version of Alex nowadays because Alex has gotten an amazing pairing. I think he's seen some resurgence, especially with the addition of Hermann Prime into the game, but he's not very overpowered by any means, and he is probably only good for around 3 archer marches. Heraclius, he's bad. Similar to Jan Ziska, they can barely work if it's like a tough situation, but they are not your go-to. Mulan, she's going to go into average. I mean, Mulan's got good buffs. She's fairly tanky nowadays for what that's worth, and you can run her as a support commander on a 7th march. That's the only reason she's an average. She doesn't really get many kills. It's just her supporting fact for yourself and your whole entire like alliance mutable. That is pretty good, but she's not your go-to commander. Definitely only for like a 7th leadership march. but just because of that unique fact, she is worthy of the average tier. Leonidas, he's trash, no one runs him anymore. Ragnar's pretty bad. He can work as a substitute to Attila, but now Attila has a relic. I don't see why you bother with Ragnar's relic, to be fully honest. Artemisia, she's like at the bottom of average, barely in the tier really, because Boudica's losing a lot of strength in the meta, and she's probably going to fall down a tier in the next tier list, if I'm fully honest. Artemisia is just going to continue falling down until she's in the trash tier once again, but for now, she's in the average because she can still work with Boudica. I recommend it somewhat when you move towards like 4 to 5 Archer Marches, but with a Shobane power, we've seen her definitely losing a lot of value. Nebuchadnezzar, average, only good for around 4 Archer Marches as a primary commander. He's solid as a anti-swarm sometimes with Henry as well, but he's, again, not really your go-to. Liu Cho, meta, amazing infantry commander. Him and Zhuge Liang, still the 2 best commanders in the game. Really good trades, very good damage, lots of march speed, fairly okay debuff, and an amazing expertise that makes Alexander the Great a really meta commander. Flavius, trash, I wouldn't use him. Cyrus, he's bad nowadays. A commander I've personally taken out of my lineup. I definitely still really enjoyed him when I used him, but he's just not that meta anymore, and he doesn't have as much strength as he really used to. Henry is average, only good for around 3 Archer Marches, similar to that of YSG, and he's just a really tanky primary. Elanor, because of how new she is and the damage she can bring, just pure damage factor, she's a bad commander, but she's not in the trash tier like a Jadwiga. Someone like Moctezuma though, they are in the trash tier because they've got no uses. Mehmed, average, similar to Caesar, he's got his use cases, he can trade pretty okay as a substitute commander, but he's not your go-to. Richard is trash, he just makes you take a ton of 7 wounds. Now Bing is probably the top of the good tier today. He's a really solid commander. I just can't put him above some of the other cav commanders in today's list. That being said though, he trades good. His best pairing is either Belisarius or William, depending on your meta ball, and I definitely do think he's a very solid commander in the current meta. Better than Belisarius and Boudica Prime for sure, but he's not worthy of the meta tier because he's just not your number 1 cav pick. You'd rather Nevsky first, and you would rather Joan. Pyrrhus, he's average actually. He's got some infantry use cases with a Liu Cho and a Scipio once you first hit Season 3 and Season of Conquest, and he's a very good KVK1 commander, but he's again not really a go-to. Same thing can be said with Sargon. He's not a go-to. He's only good for around 3 to 4 infantry marches, but he's got good damage, he's got good stats, and he's not a very bad commander by any means. He's just nowhere near some of the meta or good commanders. Minamoto used to be in the good tier. He's definitely moved down with the release of Belisarius Prime. He can still be used if you double relic him, and especially if you hit Season of Conquest with a double relic Mina. He's a great substitute to a Joan or a great substitute to a William with a Hao Che Bing. So you can definitely put Mina with Hao Che Bing, and you've got a very solid and technically free march on your gold heads. Thutmose is a bad commander, since he's just nowhere near as strong as some of the other archer commanders, and even with his relic, even though it is fairly powerful, it doesn't really make up for his severe lack of damage factor. Ditto, she's trash, don't run her on the open field. Both of the older ranged commanders, I'm just going to put them together, they're fairly average. I mean, they're not as good as some of the new meta ones. I think I'll put Margaret up a tier though, because she does have a better pairing with Gajamata. So they're the 2 better ranged commanders. If anything, I actually put them in the good tier. They're very solid right now, some of the reports I've seen coming out of these range marches, but they're not very overpowered in that your go-to. And Barber and Gajamata, they're both going to go in the bad tier. They're the 2 weaker ranged commanders, and unless you're going with the meta ranged commanders, I wouldn't run 2 ranged marches unless it's like a really big niche that you're going into. But Margaret and also Gonzalo have been trading really good, and I think it is worthy to give them a little bit of credit. Herman Prime, straight into the meta. I mean, he's a great commander. What can I say besides that? Because he's just got one of the best debuffs in the game with that amazing poison effect. Not to mention, he's just really powerful with a commander like Zhuge Liang, making probably the strongest march in the game, second to maybe only a Liu Cho with a Scipio or Alex. Ashurbanipal, he's a good commander, really good pairing with Boudica Prime, definitely has helped bring Boudica a little bit more meta, and he's got some of the highest single target damage for archers in the game, if not the highest, because he can deal up to 2,500. Amanatori, she's going to go in the bad tier, she's not your number 1 pick, only works with Artemisia. Joan Prime, straight in the good meta tier, really good with Nevsky, very powerful commander, double AoE, the best cav AoE currently available, and she's definitely worthy of that tier. I'm just going to chuck Theodora in trash. I'm going to give Tomiris the bad tier. She's okay with Herman for 4 to 5 archer marches, but she's not your go-to, and she does sometimes de-synergize with Herman when you're swarming flags or rallies, just because it removes the poison stacks, which isn't very good for the skill damage of your murder ball. Trajan, average. I mean, he's good for the 7th March. Him and Mulan are going to be the bottom of this tier today, just because they're pretty okay commanders for a 7th March for support specifically, even a 5th March sometimes, but they're not very meta. Wuzetian, she's trash. Pakal is also going to go on the average. Pretty okay when it comes to jumping in and out of cities. Okay rally still with Tarek as an anti-swarm, but not really a go-to in any of those regards. William, he's going to go in the good tier. I want to put him next to Belisarius. They're pretty much on par, same strength. Depending if you're a free-to-play, you get William. If you're a whale, you get Belisarius. Or if you have more than 5 marches, or really if you have 5 marches, you get Belisarius over William. So William's still very good in the open field, just not really at the meta tier, and also not really at the bottom of the good tier. They're both just in the middle of that tier. Justinian, average commander, works for 3 to 4 cav marches, definitely fairly solid, but he's not a go-to pick. Sending with Zhang Yu works for around 3 cav marches. I'm going to put him up next to the Henry because they're both at the same power level in my opinion. They work for 3 marches. They've got fairly good stuff going on with them. Henry's really tanky. Zhang Yu's got a fast rage cycle, so you can definitely see some pretty good matching between them. And I think Belisarius Prime and William, both being really the commanders they are, needing that really fast rage cycle, has given Zhang Yu a little bit more credit, because now if you want to run both of them, you put like a William with Zhang Yu and you put Belisarius with Hao Che Bing, and you have a very solid murder ball. So now here is the final tier list in sequential order, with the best commander in the game being Liu Chu and Zhu Lang. They're pretty much tied. And then it just continues in order all the way down to the end of the bad tier. I didn't rank the trash tier because they're all pretty much equally bad, and they're all just as bad as each other. So really, there's nothing to rank down here. You just don't use any of these commanders. But from meta, it goes pretty much Liu Chu, Zhu Lang, Herman, CPO, Nevsky, and then Joan, and just continue that same left to right combo for every single tier. And in my opinion, this would be the exact order for the best commander on the open field, down to the almost worst commanders, which are really 3 garrison commanders. So there is my final tier list for the open field as of May 2024, with the release of Belisarius and Elanor. Now, if you found today's video helpful or interesting, then do please consider subscribing to my channel. It definitely helps support me when making these videos, and if you found this video helpful, it lets me know that people want to see more tier lists for whenever new commanders are released. So if you found this open field tier list helpful, interesting, or you just found my opinion slightly entertaining, then do consider subscribing. And if you think anything was wrong, tell me in the comments. I'll just put that in there as well. But really, do consider subscribing. It supports the channel. And to everybody who's currently subscribed, a massive thank you. And to everyone who just subscribed, an even bigger thank you to you as well. Now, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.